Hey there, welcome to another Journey Through the Bible overview. Today we are going to be looking over Paul's letter to the Thessalonians, the first letter to the Thessalonians, which really is an epistle of great encouragement. Paul wrote this letter as an encouragement to a church that he previously had planted on his second missionary journey. The church was located in what is today northern Greece. Thessalonica, the place where the church was located, it was a strategic city that had a population of nearly 200,000 people. Because of its location along the main east and west trade route, it was the center of activity and trade. So basically, think about Thessalonica as the New York City of its day. It was filled with businessmen and soldiers and sailors and travelers and traders. And so with this constant influx of men, you can imagine how prostitution was rampant and crime in Thessalonica was actually out of control. Pagan temples and shrines were everywhere. And because of the number of Jews that were in that city, there was even a very significant synagogue. If there was ever a city that needed the gospel, Thessalonica was it. And so Paul and Silas in 49 AD went there and planted a church. Now, to understand the background to this letter, you might want to take some time and just review Acts 17, verses 1 through 9. Because in these verses, Luke describes Paul's ministry in Thessalonica. He talks about where he went, what he did, how long he was there. And Luke tells us that after being in Thessalonica for only 3 weeks, there were some Jews who were threatened by the gospel. And so they stirred up a mob of Gentiles in the city to kill Paul and Silas. So these two missionaries were forced to slip out of town in the middle of the night. But Paul later became so burdened about this lone church that he sent Timothy back. And when Timothy returned to Paul, he reported that the church in Thessalonica was actually doing great. These believers, he said, were boldly living for Christ, and their lives were a testimony to the power of the gospel. Paul was so encouraged by this that he sat down and he wrote this letter, a letter that was filled with encouragement and hope and great affection. If you want to look at the breakdown of the book, the first 3 chapters, Paul encourages the believers there for their steadfast commitment to Christ. And then in the last 2 chapters, chapters 4 and 5, he encourages them to remain steadfast in Christ until he returned. Now, taken together, Paul encouraged the church in at least 5 ways. First, he encouraged the church about their identity in Christ. These were all first-generation believers who had come out of paganism and Jewish legalism. So Paul encouraged them with what he had heard about them, that their faith in Christ was alive and well. He said that the evidence of their work of faith and labor of love and steadfastness of hope made it clear that they truly were in Christ. They had previously been entrenched in the idolatry of their culture, but now everything about their lives radically stood out in their culture. And the impact of their testimony for Christ was impacting people's lives everywhere. The second way that Paul encouraged the church was he encouraged them about his ministry when he was with them. He exposed his heart and he reminded them of his ministry. His ministry among them had been like the tenderness of a mother and the concern of a father. And so his ministry actually served as a model for how they should approach ministry within the community. Third, Paul encouraged this church about his desire to instruct them personally. In chapter 3, he encouraged them with the report that he heard from Timothy, how much that report had encouraged his heart. And so he told them that he constantly prays for them to grow and to mature in their faith. Fourth, Paul encouraged the church how to live until Christ returned for his people. Paul challenged them with how to live a last days lifestyle that's marked by holiness and love. He also instructed them about what will happen when the Lord returns. You see, the believers there knew that Jesus was coming again. Paul had taught them that. However, they weren't sure what it would mean for those who had died, perhaps even been persecuted for their faith in Christ. So Paul gave them instruction about the events that would unfold when Jesus comes back for his people and how they were to live until then. And then finally, Paul encouraged this church about living for Christ in times of trouble. You see, from day one, these believers experienced persecution from those who didn't know Christ in their community. They needed to be assured that suffering for a believer is actually normative and that it should be expected. So Paul instructed them about what living for Jesus in times of trouble looked like. He taught them how they were to serve each other and how they were to respond to those who oppose them and how they were to view their circumstances. 1 Thessalonians is actually one of my favorite New Testament epistles. It's filled with encouragement and hope and love. And I trust that as you read through this letter that you're going to be challenged with living a last days lifestyle. I hope that you will be encouraged to reach out to your world for Christ and how to support your brothers and sisters in the church. So enjoy your journey through 1 Thessalonians and be encouraged.